All right. Aloha mai kako. My name is Kaipuke Kona. I'm the Lahaina president for HFUU Lahaina chapter. Um, Born and raised here in Lahaina, and happy to be here and with you all and anyone else that's watching. Excited to introduce the speaker we have tonight. And she's born and raised in Lahaina. Graduated from Lahaina Luna High School, oldest school west of Mississippi River. She graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Agriculture, specializing in agroecology and environmental quality, a minor in ecology and conservation biology, and a certificate in tropical forestry from the University of Hawaii at Hilo. She is the Hawaii State Regional Grazing Specialist under the USDA, and she's also with the Natural Resource Conservation Service, NRCS. My sister, Carolyn Wong.
Thank you very much, Kaipo. Yeah, it's my pleasure to be with you guys tonight. Thank you for the invitation. As Kaipo said, yes, my name is Carolyn Wong, also known as Carolyn Alveloa nowadays. And I work with the USDA NRCS for the Pacific Islands area. I'm based in Waimea on the Big Island. As you said, I'm born and raised in Lahaina. I've been working in the field of natural resources conservation in Hawaii for the past 20 years. And it's my pleasure to share with you today on the relationships between healthy soil and healthy grazing land and how we can graze for healthy soils. It's going to be something of a crash course because we only have 30 minutes. And if we can, I like to try to do this with a little bit of interaction. So for those of you that are on Zoom, if you can keep that chat handy, it makes it a little bit more fun in my opinion. So stay close to your keyboard and okay, let's go. All right, here we go. So yeah, right off the bat, I have a question for you. No, it's not what episode of Yellowstone is this picture from. What I would like to know, if you would, please, in the chat, is tell me what you think about when you think about soil health. What does soil health mean to you? If there's a word or two that comes to your mind, please enter that in the chat. And we'll just start off with getting to know each other a little bit as far as what soil health means. All right, I have someone to put healthy plants and animals. Great. Fertile. Awesome. Anyone else? Microorganisms. Yes. Okay, right components. Good. Awesome. All great answers. All great answers. Thank you for participating in my quick poll. And yeah, you guys are, teeming with organic matter. Haha. Yes. Soil health is a broad idea and it can mean a lot of things to many people. A lot of people hear soil health and their first thought is soil fertility. And while healthy soils are more fertile than unhealthy soils, the concept of soil health is about much more than just soil fertility. Soil health is more about the function of soils. Healthy soils are strong and resilient in their capacity to function as a living ecosystem to support plants, animals, and humans. The term ecosystem is one we often hear and can bring many different things to mind. An ecosystem is an environment. It has organisms in their natural habitat. It's comprised of plants and animals and bugs that make up an often complex food web. All these things are in a type of balance with each other as the environment provides for their needs like water and air and food, everything that they need for their life cycle so they can live and grow and interact in, usually a very beautiful, diverse system. Those are just some general concepts, right, around ecosystems. And the Earth is covered with all kinds of ecosystems, depending on where it's located and several other abiotic factors such as temperature, and latitude and longitude and rainfall and topography. The Earth is comprised of thousands, if not millions, of different ecosystems, which can be experienced at many different levels as well. And as we're all probably familiar with, except maybe our friend in Texas, I'm not sure, but Hawaii has a huge diversity of ecosystems. The photo here in the slide just show just a few of some of the extremes of different ecosystems that we have across the island chain. Well, our soils are also part of those ecosystems, and they can be every bit as diverse as the terrestrial ecosystems we are more familiar with, the above ground parts. The soil is a complex environment that serves as habitat to all kinds of organisms, many of which we need a microscope to see, but it can be every bit as complex as, say, a forest or a jungle ecosystem or a desert. There are predator and prey animals that rely on plants for food and clean air and water, same as our above ground habitats. And just like our above ground ecosystems need to be healthy in order to provide important functions such as flood protection or the provision of food for us and other animals, habitat, etc., our soils also provide functions that are dependent on its health. And so with soil health, we're talking about this capacity of the soil to function as a living ecosystem. It's much more than just fertility. It's much more than just organic matter. It has a lot to do with organic matter and microorganisms, which all contribute to fertility, but it's so much more, and it's really focusing on functioning as a living ecosystem to provide these essential functions that we need to support plants, animals, and ultimately us humans. So why do we even care though? Like, why is it so important? There's so many other issues out there. Why soil health? What are some of these functions that healthy soils support? And let's focus on how it relates to grazing land. So soil health has a direct effect on the plant community and its production, composition, and vigor, all things that are important to agriculture. Soil health also affects the nutrient cycle and watershed function. Strong watershed function supported by healthy soils can help rangelands be more resistant to drought, something that people might be interested in right now, given the drought we're going through. Healthy soils also have strong soil structure and are less susceptible to soil erosion. Healthy soils supporting a healthy plant community provides good wildlife habitat as well as productive pasture. Healthy soils and rangelands also are known to sequester more carbon, and they can be more resilient to the invasion of invasive plants. Just a few reasons why soil health is important. All right, so now that we've defined some of the great functions that healthy soils provide and what we mean by soil health, how do we manage for soil health as it relates to grazing land? The key principles for managing for soil health on any landscape, any land use, whether it's cropland or rangeland or grazing land or whatever, number one is to keep it covered. Soils are not meant to be exposed, at least not for long. Second fundamental principle is we want to manage for deep root systems. And we're going to get into each of these in more detail. But roots are the main interface between life above the soil and life below. And as we will see, they are crucial for supporting healthy soils. The third principle is diversity. Diversity at every level makes the whole system stronger and more resilient, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. And finally, minimizing or more realistically, managing disturbances that affect the soil. And for grazing land, that is the biggest key principle, and which I'll explain here shortly. Okay, so number one, keeping it covered. Keeping the soil covered by plant litter and living plants, living plant bases, living plant canopy is so important, especially on rangeland, because it affects everything else. The soil is the foundation of the landscape, and if it is being compromised, the whole system is vulnerable to collapse. Once a site gets to this stage, like in this photo, it is very difficult to stabilize. This site has lost so much topsoil, it is inhospitable to plants. It absorbs little to no water, and it loses more soil with every large or rain or wind event. And all of this started with the loss of cover. That's a really important connection to make. You can see in the surrounding areas where the cover is being lost, you can see how that erosion is spreading and is increasing, making this erosion scar bigger and bigger. But let's take a little bit of a closer look to understand why this happens. So bare ground is exposed to what we call wind shear and rainfall impact. And both of those can initiate the two different forms of soil erosion, wind erosion and water erosion. In this upper left photo here, with this much bare ground, you can see where wind scour is starting to occur. When a raindrop hits bare ground like this, the impact of that raindrop on bare ground knocks off small soil particles that then become suspended in water and can move off-site. Bare soil also absorbs less water than soil that is covered. As the water collects on the surface and of the soil and it begins to move across the landscape, it becomes even more damaging. That concentrated flow will carve out gullies and move even more soil. In addition to the damaging effect of erosion, when more water is running off, less is sinking down into the soil profile where we need it. With less water moving down into the ground, rainfall has less of and a shorter lasting effect on the plant community, and the landscape is more vulnerable now to drought. The area might be getting rain, but if it's not getting captured in the soil, it really has very little benefit to the land or to our aquifer. But soil that is covered and is protected from rainfall impact has better infiltration and much less runoff. More water gets in deeper and is available to support plant growth longer. All of that is hugely influenced just by cover. Managing for soil cover is probably the single most important thing we can do to support healthy soil and healthy grazing lands. Bare soil puts in jeopardy the fundamental services provided by healthy soil. Bare soil erodes, leaving the land barren. It absorbs less water. It is more prone to drought. It's hotter. It's often inhospitable to plants. Bare soil left untreated can impair water quality and air quality via water erosion and wind erosion. Bare soil can lead to irreversible damage to the land and render a landscape virtually useless. Unfortunately, we have too many examples of this in Hawaii. Covered soil, on the other hand, is stable. It's able to absorb more water. It's cooler, and it thereby conserves moisture. It provides an environment that's conducive to plants. It protects water and air quality. It stores more carbon, which everybody's really interested in nowadays. And it keeps a landscape sustainable, and it supports the habitats we and our animals rely on. Okay, number 2. For healthy soil, we need deep living root systems. Beyond the obvious benefits that a healthy root system provides for the plant, deep living roots also benefit the soil. Roots are the main way energy and water and nutrients move from the environment above ground into the environment below ground. Where there are deep living roots, there are living plants, obviously. And as we just learned, plants and litter protect the soil from rainfall impact and help to moderate soil temperature. The roots attached to these plants affect the soil physically by providing channels for water infiltration, and they can even help to break up compacted layers. And roots also affect the soil environment biologically by the sugars and the enzymes that they exude that help to support the soil food web. And here we go, the soil food web. Don't let this slide overwhelm you. It's busy, I know, but it's a really cool illustration of what's going on. It's a great diagram of a root tip and a few microscopic images of soil organisms, so we can talk about this soil food web a little bit more. The soil food web is important because it affects nutrient cycling and soil structure, which helps to support healthy plant communities and good plant growth. Soil is so much more than just dirt. There's so much going on in here that it's practically a world unto itself. As we think about the soil as an ecosystem, the roots and the area right around the root called the rhizosphere is the area of the highest microbial concentration. This is where the party's at. The roots exude sugars and enzymes that feed the bacteria. Bacteria feed the nematodes and other predatory microbes. This environment also feeds fungi in the soil that together with other microbes help break down that wonderful organic matter that my brother likes to apply on his farm for mulch and all the great benefits of that. Well, they also feed the microbes, but if you don't have a healthy community of microbes, that whole system breaks down. But when you have a healthy system of microbes, they can break down that organic matter, make it into plant available nutrients. All this activity, all this life below ground enhances and supports that life above ground, but none of it is possible without the roots in the equation. Deep, healthy root systems are crucial to healthy microbial communities, which are fundamental to healthy soils. All right, number 3, diversity. If we've got our soil covered and we're managing for deep root systems, the next thing we want is diversity. Different plants have different types of root systems. Grasses tend to have real fibrous root systems, stays closer to the surface. Forbs usually have deeper tap roots. Deeper roots help with deeper mineral cycling and deeper water infiltration. Same with shrubs and trees. All of those play important roles. Shallower roots help support soil microbes that break down that residue and helps to improve soil fertility near the surface. And just like different plant types are food sources for different types of animals above ground, they also serve as different food sources for different microbes below ground because of the different exudates that they release into that rhizosphere we talked about. Plant diversity provides habitat diversity for animals and microbes both above and below ground. So diversity creates diversity, right? And the more diversity we have, the more resilient a landscape is, and the more robust and vigorous it can be. So here are a couple of pictures of very diverse pastures here in Hawaii. This picture on the left is showing a low elevation plant community that has guinea grass, star grass, a couple types of desmodium, perennial peanut, and other small grasses. It's a highly productive grass finishing pasture, and it's perfectly suited to the environment that it's found in. Likewise, on the right, this high elevation pasture has a nice mixture of kikuyu grass, sweet vernal, orchard grass, white clover, vetch, and dandelion. Managing for diversity in tropical ecosystems can be a little tricky, especially here in Hawaii, where some of our naturalized species are very aggressive, but it can be done. Diverse pastures are important for soil health, but they are equally, if not more important, for landscape resilience. That would be a talk in and of itself, so I'm just going to leave that right there, but diversity is important. Okay, number 4, minimizing or managing disturbances. This is the kicker. Disturbances, first of all, are anything that disturbs a site. There are a lot of different disturbances that can affect grazing land. Flooding, fire, grazing, some places mowing and brush clearing. These are just a few common examples. For tonight's presentation, we're going to focus on the 2 that can be the most severe and common and that can be influenced directly by grazers. First one we're going to get out of the way is wildfire. Wildfire is just one disturbance. It's been in the forefront lately. You know, last year we had some massive fires, and it seems like every year we're having more and more. And so for grazing lands in Hawaii, this is definitely a hot topic, pun intended. Anyway, while they are infrequent, the problem is they can be very large and as a result impact very large areas. This type of disturbance can be super damaging to soils. In areas where fires burn especially hot, for example, areas with an excessive fine fuel buildup or woody residue buildup, where the fire not only burns up all of that above ground plant matter, but it can also burn up all the organic matter in the soil, which then changes the structure in the soil surface layers. It leaves the soil blackened, ashy, loose, and powdery. Soil structure is gone, organic matter is gone, and that whole ecosystem has been devastated, not only above ground, but also below, where these fires burn really hot. These soils that have been exposed to this really high heat can become hydrophobic, where they actually repel water. In situations like this, the roots, seeds, and plant bases of whatever was there can be entirely consumed, basically leaving the soil void of life. It's been almost sterilized. With no life above ground and no roots providing food for the life below ground, soil health will definitely suffer. When this kind of damage happens at a large scale, it can indeed be quite catastrophic. These sites can recover, but recovery may be slow. And if there's no cover, then like we just covered, it leaves the site vulnerable to all these other risks, right? There's more erosion risk, infiltration is reduced, and if it goes on for too long, it can really snowball and lead to other problems that we just talked about. The other type of disturbance that we want to minimize or manage is actually grazing. Grazing is a disturbance, but if it's done right, it can be beneficial to a soil in a pasture or range environment. But overgrazing is a type of disturbance that can also do a lot of damage to soil and landscape health. And it doesn't matter what animal is doing the grazing, whether it's domestic livestock or wild goats or sheep or deer or donkeys or wild cattle. Overgrazing is overgrazing, and it all has the same effect. Overgrazing affects all three principles of soil health. It reduces the cover of the soil, it affects the root system, and it can have a negative effect on diversity. Overgrazing can also cause soil compaction, and all these things together are known to have huge effects on soil health and water infiltration. Well-managed grazing, on the other hand, can have positive effects on all the key principles of soil health, and we're going to talk about that in our next section. But first, get your chat box ready. I have another question for you. I need to make sure y'all are still with me. First question is, what function of soil health do you appreciate the most, no matter what your land use is? Please respond in the chat. I listed a long list of functions that healthy soils provide. Which is the most valuable to you? Is it maybe watershed function, nutrient cycling, simple plant productivity, grows food, maybe drought resistance, carbon sequestration? What do you guys think? All right, somebody said watershed function. All right, lots of watershed people in the house. Awesome. Holding water, yeah. Yep, that's such an important function, and especially for us, we live on an island. Carbon sequestration, awesome. Yeah, all of these things are important. There's no wrong answers. Nutrients, totally. The healthier our soils and the more that nutrient cycle is working, the less commercial fertilizers we need to provide, perhaps, right? Commercial is not the word I was looking for. Man-made. And so, thank you guys for your input. Depending on what the main limiting factors might be in your area, it's going to affect your priorities, right? Your priorities might be a little bit different. If you're out in Puna or Haiku or Kapa'a, lack of rain might not necessarily be your biggest problem, but maybe strong nutrient cycling is what's most important for you. Or if maybe you're in one of our leeward arid areas, or just in an area that's being impacted by the current drought we're in, maybe being able to capture and store moisture in the soil might be more critical. But it sounds like from our chat box here. For all of us, watershed function, for sure, that recharge of our aquifers, keeping our surface waters and our streams and our oceans clean is so important. This is our home. This is our habitat, right? And we really need it to be healthy if it's going to be a good habitat for us and our keiki and the future generations. Okay, awesome. One more question. Don't go away. One more question. Okay. What is one of the key principles for managing for soil health? I listed 4. Which one stuck for you? One had to do with, good, keep it covered. All right. I did beat that dead horse, so I hope it stuck. Keeping it covered. There was another had to do with roots, and diversity, disturbance, right? Those are 4 keys. Yeah, diversity, good. If none of them stuck yet, don't sweat it. Don't worry, I'm not done. But we are turning the corner here and we're on the home stretch. So stay with me. Here we go. All right, so bringing it down to actual fundamentals of grazing and what can we do specifically in grazing operations. Grazing for soil health is all about proper grazing management. Proper grazing management is the key for building soil health on grazing land. And proper grazing management, we're talking about appropriate stocking rates, the right degree of grazing, appropriate frequency of grazing, and we also need to be conscientious of the season of grazing because it can and does affect, all these things can and do affect the degree of disturbance, the impacts to soil cover, the impacts to the plant root systems, and the diversity of plant communities. Grazing management is the difference between whether grazing disturbance is damaging or beneficial to the soil. It can even influence the potential for catastrophic disturbances such as a wildfire if it's used properly to manage fine fuel loads to avoid those super high temperature, long lasting soil surface type of fires. It can be used to manage those fine fuel loads for the purpose of wildfire mitigation and hopefully reducing the damaging effect of these wildfires. So some of the key things managers of grazing land can do for their soil health, starting with managing for cover. When it comes to grazing, it's the old rule of thumb, take half, leave half, right? If you've been in grazing for a while, you've been to any workshops, you've heard this before. We have to manage for adequate cover, and by leaving half, we accomplish that. In our higher rainfall environments, leaving half usually leaves plenty of cover to cover the soil. In our drier environments, the season of grazing can be important for managing cover because of how it can affect plant density or the number of plants and how closely they grow to each other. In order to have an effect on that, we have to be thinking about how do these plants reproduce? How do I increase the number of plants on my landscape? So allowing some grass seed to mature at least once per year can really help to ensure high plant density and good soil cover. It can be a little bit of a paradox because allowing grass to seed you sacrifice a little bit of forage quality, but making those deposits into the seed bank is crucial to the future sustainability of the pasture, and it's well worth it. So whether you skip a pasture so it can go to seed, or you move the livestock through a paddock a little faster, whatever it takes to allow some grass to produce seeds, allow those seeds to mature and get deposited into the seed bank for next year, all of that helps to maintain or increase cover in our bunch grass communities, as well as maintain good pasture composition that has more grass than weeds. Of course, these first 2 bullets depend on having an appropriate stocking rate. Matching the right number and type of animals to an appropriate paddock size and grazing period is a really powerful tool, and it's fundamental to a successful grazing and soil health program. And speaking of grazing periods, this is where frequency, or how often and how quickly a herd comes in and grazes a pasture. Having an appropriate grazing and recovery period for the pasture grass and the environment that you're in is key to managing for cover. If animals are grazing a pasture too long, it can expose plants to regrazing of regrowth. Recovery periods that are too short can bring animals back into a pasture before the forages have actually had time to recover. Another rule of thumb is to allow your grasses to get to the 4 to 5 leaf stage before coming back into a pasture. And that's what the illustration there tries to illustrate. If we could do this in the field, it's really fun to find grasses that are in recovered states or not fully recovered. But for a Zoom type of platform, this is the best I can do. In order to be able to do all of this and to know what it means or what it looks like to take half, how long you leave your herd in a pasture, whether you need to go to seed, when is a good time to go to seed, what your stocking rate should look like, all of the stuff that I'm talking about, it all hinges on you knowing your environment. You have to know your pastures, what they're made up of, what are your forage species. You got to know how they're unique and different and what their needs are. Guinea grass is not the same as buffalo grass, is not the same as kikuyu grass. Pasture legumes are different altogether too, like white clover or kaimi clover or aulikoa. They all have different needs when it comes to how they're grazed and how it's rested. But as you can grow an understanding of these things and know how to adjust your grazing management in order to ensure that the needs of the plant community are met, you can help ensure a diverse and robust soil cover that will then ensure that you have that you can support a healthy soil ecosystem. So once cover is lost, things can really start to go sideways fast. The site in the middle in this picture, these are all Hawaii pictures, by the way, and they're all from very similar ecosystems, right? This dry buffalo grass ecosystem. The site in the middle is starting to have more and more bare ground, and this site is either going to go one of two ways. If this site is allowed to lose more topsoil, it'll become harder and harder to restore cover. The site on the left is well along down this process already. It's already had so much erosion, it's down to subsoil, and it probably won't recover without intervention. If the causes of the loss of cover are not addressed, this eroding area will likely increase as the grazing pressure gets higher and higher on the remaining plants because there's less and less ground that's actually growing grass now. The site on the right, on the other hand, is the potential. For the site in the middle, it's still possible to make management adjustments to help increase plant density and cover and to help the site stabilize and improve over time. But it's not going to happen without making changes to what caused it to get to the point that it's at in the first place. The site on the left got to the state it's in due to unmanaged disturbances, unmanaged, mostly grazing impact, mostly grazing of wild animals, I'm sorry to say. To my knowledge, where I took this picture, hasn't had domestic livestock in a couple of decades, and it still got to this point. So management of this disturbance is really a kuleana of the people that have influence over landscape. Managing for deep root systems. So this kind of goes hand in hand with managing for cover because it all comes back to this grazing management, right, that we're talking about. This picture shows the results of a study that compared how different cutting or grazing heights affected root systems. The plant on the far left had 90% of its top growth removed. The next one had 70% removed. And the third from the left is in that sweet spot with about 50% removed and compared with the control plant on the far right with nothing removed. So they did this treatment repeatedly in order to show how it affects the root system. You can see how going from 50 to 70% really has a significant impact on the root mass. And between no grazing and taking 50%, the root mass is really affected very little. So the key takeaway for this is what you do to the plant above the ground affects the plant below the ground. If we're managing for soil health and we want lots of cover and deep roots, grazing that aims to not exceed that 50% threshold, that 50% removal, really leaves a lot of cover and it supports these healthy root systems that we're after. Once we cross that 50% threshold, there is a cost. There's less roots, which means less infiltration. The plant has less roots with which to access resources in the soil, and that plant is going to take longer to recover. Pastures that are consistently overgrazed will have shallower root systems across the board, and it'll be more susceptible to drought. It'll usually have more bare ground over time, and the soil health will continue to get weaker and weaker. Pastures that are continuously overgrazed will not absorb water as readily, and overall production will decline. Pastures need to be grazed appropriately, managing the degree and frequency of grazing to maintain these deep root systems. This applies to both managed livestock and wildlife. Pastures that have been grazed excessively can usually come back. The root systems can be restored. They are living plants after all, but it will take time and it might need an extended rest period in order to allow these root systems to be restored and to get things back on track. As long as there's animals that keep coming in and helping themselves and keep disturbing and keep removing the above ground biomass, it really will never get a chance to rest, and it's very, very difficult for the plant to recover, especially when you get drought conditions like we have now. Anyway, proper grazing management aims to graze at an appropriate stocking rate and appropriate frequencies in order to avoid overgrazing as much as possible. And if and when it ever comes a time that it can't be avoided or it happens, figuring out how to get things back into balance, figuring out what's off, and making the changes that need to be made in order to give the pasture the rest it needs to stay healthy. All right, managing for diversity. Managing for diversity with grazing management, again, requires a really good knowledge of your forage species, their ecosystem, and what their needs are. How do they need to be grazed to persist? All grasses are not created equal. How do they reproduce? When do they go to seed? This picture is a picture of a mixed pasture of mostly orchard grass and kikuyu grass. Orchard grass reproduces by seed. Kikuyu grass is a stoloniferous grass, and it doesn't require going to seed to reproduce. It grows by stolons and rhizomes. Orchard grass is a cool season grass, so it tends to grow best in the fall through spring. Orchard grass is also a bunch grass, and it has a higher stubble height requirement than kikuyu grass. You can graze kikuyu grass down to 3-4 inches and it can come right back, but with orchard grass, its growing points are higher, its overall above ground biomass is taller. If we're trying to take 50%, we can't graze it down to as low as we would maybe graze something like kikuyu grass. So we got to be conscientious of what we're grazing, how much of the pasture is made up of it, and what is our objective for the pasture. If we graze this pasture too short, past that 50% threshold for orchard grass, it will impact the plant, and it will take that plant longer to come back. During the spring, winter, and fall, when the conditions are favorable for orchard grass, we could be careful about how we graze it so we can be strong and vigorous during its season, and make sure that we allow it to produce a seed crop if we want that pasture composition that makes up above orchard grass. If we want it to increase, we have to allow it to reproduce. A short grazing period during this time of year that doesn't go past that 50% threshold on the orchard grass will ensure that it can regrow quickly while the conditions are favorable. Allowing it to go to seed again will ensure that we'll have new orchard grass plants next fall, and over time we can see the orchard grass component increase. During the summer months, when it's too hot and dry, like in this picture, this area does get very dry during the summer. That's when we have an opportunity to graze more for kikuyu grass. If we put down a good crop of seed, this can be a really good time to graze it down a little bit shorter. At that point, the orchard grass is not regrowing, so it's already got some energy stored in its crown. We can afford to take down a little bit more. And by opening up that kikuyu grass mat, it will make opportunity for those seeds that were put down by the orchard grass to have a chance to grow. And over time, we can see the pasture composition start to change. When fall comes around again, we'd want to check the pastures for new plants, look at the growing conditions, and adjust our grazing accordingly. This is just one example of how manipulating season and degree of use and frequency of grazing, a rancher can just use management to influence the diversity in their pastures. Of course, a pasture can always be overseeded with a new species appropriate to the environment, and then grazing again modified or manipulated in order to have conditions that are ideal to supporting that new plant in the environment. But that takes more input. If you've already got some diversity in your pastures and you just want to see it increase, sometimes just making adjustments to your grazing management can have that result. It just takes some observation, some kilo, and adjustments. Okay, managing disturbance. So managed grazing supports healthy soils, which enable functioning landscapes, capture water, hold the soil, support healthy plant communities, support quality livestock production, and successful, sustainable agricultural businesses, right? It all hinges on this management of disturbance. Unmanaged grazing, though, in the form of overgrazing like this, the unmanaged disturbance in the form of overgrazing, like I'm showing in this picture, leads to all the things we talked about. And this is a perfect illustration. We have a loss of cover, we have a loss of root systems, severe impairment of water and nutrient cycling, overall loss of landscape productivity, watershed function, and is completely disabled here pretty much. And we basically have eventual landscape collapse that we call desertification. The amount of grazing pressure on this landscape far exceeds the land's carrying capacity. The amount of grazing is so excessive over so long a period of time, most of the grasses have been grazed out and been replaced with either brush or toxic forbs or bare soil. This type of disaster is becoming far too common on our islands. It's usually where we have wildlife numbers that are not managed enough. This is supposed to be agricultural land, ranch land, but in this condition, it can no longer support livestock. Let me be clear, the animals are not responsible for this. They're not out there doing this intentionally. People are allowing this to happen. People are making decisions that allow this to happen. This is a tragedy of desertification that happened on Kaho'olawe, and it's happening all over again in some of our smaller parts of the bigger islands. But you give it enough time, and unfortunately, we will see history repeat itself. Let's give it a few more years. But this is a perfect illustration of how the whole system can fall apart with unmanaged disturbance. Sorry to be such a downer, but that's the reality. But these principles, again, coming back to that, they really work. And I put this slide in here because it would have been so cool to do this simulation, but being on Zoom, it's impossible. But try and stick with me and I'll explain it. A few years ago, the Grazing Lands Coalition and we took our rainfall simulator around the state and we set up demonstrations like the one in this picture. This is all when soil health was first becoming a buzzword. Everywhere we took it, we would go out in the field and we'd collect soil and plant cover from the local areas. Be careful that we're always comparing apples to apples. So in this picture, we collected 5 trays of soil cut out of pastures, and we've got them all set up in this special table that's designed to simulate rainfall and show what happens when it rains. There's a sprinkler on the top that makes it rain on these trays, and the water either gets captured as runoff in the jars in the front. You can see I've got that runoff jar labeled, or it will trickle down through the trays and get caught in the jars that are underneath. Underneath the trays, there's a special holder that will funnel the water down into the jars that would show infiltration. Anyway, I had just run it when I took this picture, and the 2 trays on the far left and the far right, those are guinea grass trays. And you can see the trays are taller, they're deeper, because guinea grass is usually deeper rooted. But we collected this guinea grass from the same area, same soil type, same forage species, but just different management. The trays are, so the well-managed guinea grass tray on the left, you can see that jar in the front, it had virtually 0 runoff after we made it rain, and we made it rain pretty good. But all the water that fell on that tray went down through the tray, as deep as it is, it went down through the soil and was collected in the jar in the back. As opposed to the overgrazed tray on the far right, where 90% of the rainfall ran off and got collected in the front jar, and very little made it down through the soil profile to the jar underneath. The 3 trays in the middle are Kikuyu grass trays. The first 2 are from well-managed pastures, just in slightly different states. The first one on the left is fully rested and recovered, and the one in the middle, the second one, it's just been grazed, but it was in the same area of this really well-managed pasture. It was good, strong, vigorous pasture stand. You can see that both of those 2 trays had virtually no runoff, and all the water went down through the soil. The third tray, however, is from the same area in an overgrazed state. And you can see that almost like 80% of the rainfall ran off and took soil with it, and just a fraction was infiltrated. A demonstration like this really helps to show that the way a pasture is managed The condition of the pasture on the landscape really affects the soil and its function. And in this case, it's a perfect illustration of watershed function and a landscape's ability to absorb rainfall. I wish I got pictures of these trays when we flipped them out and we showed how the roots looked after we were done. It's just like you'd expect. The well-managed trays had nice, deep, abundant roots, while the overgrazed trays, the roots were really scarce and didn't even hardly make it to the bottom. Okay, a few more slides, stay with me. Here is a perspective of this same concept in the field. These photos were taken in neighboring pastures, same time, same weather, all that stuff, same day. The only difference is the management, one side of the fence to the other. Note the differences in the amount of cover, the vigor of the forage plants. Look at if you could identify the plants, I look at grass all day, every day, so I can recognize everything in there. I realize not everybody can, but take my word for it. The composition of the overgrazed pasture on the left is changing, where guinea grass is getting grazed out. In fact, there's only like 3 guinea grass plants in that picture, and it's getting replaced with less desirable, less palatable, less nutritious grasses. How do you think the root systems would compare between these two sites? We would expect the short overgrazed grass probably has a shallower root system, whereas the well-managed site likely has deeper, more abundant roots, right? Now that we know what we know about the microbial world down there, it also starts to make sense why there would be differences in fertility. The overgrazed site is going to have less root exudates and less cover. And so there's less organic matter, which means there's less food for the microbial community, right? So there's going to be less nutrient cycling overall. In light of what we just observed with the rainfall simulator and what we understand about healthy soils and how it affects water infiltration, we can also deduce how these two sites would do during and after a rain. A healthy site would take water much deeper into the soil profile. There'd be hardly any runoff. And with deeper roots, it would also be able to access that water that went deeper into the soil profile. And so that grass would grow and would be more productive for a longer period of time than this overgrazed site. The overgrazed site would likely have more runoff, less water would go down into the soil profile. And since those roots are only so shallow, they can only access whatever is available to it in the top couple inches anyway. So it would stop growing sooner and would be more susceptible to drought conditions and more susceptible to invasion by invasive species. So just a couple of pictures to maybe help bring it home. So to wrap it up, grazing management and correctly balancing stocking rate to the land's carrying capacity, controlling the degree of grazing that's allowed and how frequently and when the land is grazed, these are all keys to soil health on grazing land. These fundamental aspects of grazing management have direct effects on the 4 soil health principles of keeping the soil covered, encouraging deeply rooted and diverse plant communities, and managing disturbances so that they're not detrimental to soil health. All these things work together to ensure the capacity of the soil to function as a living ecosystem to support plants, animals, and humans. These keep our lands healthy and productive. They help support clean water and air. They facilitate effective watershed function. They help our lands be more resilient even in the face of drought. They produce healthy animals and people, all things that we refer to in this concept that we call aina momona. Proper grazing management is a powerful tool for preserving the productivity and health of our land. And of course, if you want any assistance in assessing your soil health or your pasture condition, or you want to figure out maybe what you can do to improve the health of your soils and your lands, please reach out to us at NRCS. We have planners across the Pacific Islands area that are ready to help you. Here is our website where you can find our contact info on all of our offices. With that, I'll take any questions. I think John Dutton appreciates healthy soils. Look at him with that shovel. I hope this presentation was informative and changes the way you see your pastures. More than just the beautiful landscape it is, more than how much grass is or isn't there. more than thinking about that fence that needs fixing or where that darn missing cow might be. I hope you look at your pastures now and think about your soil and appreciate all that it does for all of us, and consider the privilege and opportunity that you have and what more you might be able to do to help it thrive. Anyway, with that, feel free to unmute yourself or put it in the chat. I believe we have a monitor on Facebook, so any questions, fire away. Thank you all for coming.
We have a question here. It says, do you have experience with silvopasture, planting trees with the grazing? I think she meant grazing, but it says grazing.
Yes, silvopasture has really come in vogue. More and more people are looking at how they might be able to diversify and create some landscape layering. So silvopasture is definitely an option. It totally depends on your objectives and what you're trying to, what you'd like to grow, what the purposes you're growing it for. We have a lot of people that are interested in planting tree crops. Things like ulu is become kind of popular. I've always thought there was more potential for coconut if we had more of maybe a fresh coconut market. But it can be done, but it needs to be done carefully. When you're trying to bring together two different land uses like cropland and grazing, there's a lot of potential pitfalls. You want to be conscientious of the trees you're going to plant and make sure that they're not poisonous to livestock. That I've seen that go bad. There are some plants that are just not good to have livestock around. Livestock will usually figure it out, but you could suffer losses in the short term. You'd also want to make sure that your plant spacing is adequate for allowing enough light to support the grass plant community that you're trying to keep underneath. Keeping your animals from damaging your trees can be tricky, especially if you're growing food crop trees. Silvopasture on the mainland is done primarily with trees for wood production, especially in the southeast. And here on the Big Island, we've got a lot of eucalyptus plantation that's been planted. On Kauai, there's a lot of albizia and other biofuel crops that are sometimes grazed underneath. And so with all of those things, we just want to be conscientious about the amount of light, that your forage is compatible with the type of tree you're growing, that your tree is compatible with the type of livestock you're growing, and figuring out how you're going to protect your trees while they are in a young, vulnerable state, so that they will survive to provide the benefit that you're after. So silvopasture is a great question, and it's complex, so it's not an easy answer, but it can be done. Just does take a lot of management and oversight.
So we have a comment from Puanani. It's not really a question, but a comment says, don't know enough yet to ask questions, but I'm very grateful for this presentation. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge.
Awesome. Yeah, my pleasure.
I have a question I could ask better than typing it. So Maui County has came up with a Department of Ag, and in their discussions, they're trying to, dial in all the different lack of a better way to say that, issues of ag, when we know it's pretty broad. Understanding like the overgrazing of kaupo and kaikinui and ulupalakua and kihe or kula, lower kula, with deer and kakulo with the goats. Do you see a way that, or what would be your recommendation that the Department of Ag, the county, could now start collaborating with you folks and state and trying to put management plans together for those areas? What does that look like?
Well, that's a great question. With that whole situation, and just to kind of bring it home to what we just kind of talked about, it's clearly a situation of too much disturbance, right? Too much grazing animals on the landscape. How to find a solution to that is going to take input from a lot of different stakeholders. I think there's a lot of people that have been coming to the table for a long time. I know that there is a Access Deer task force I was on. We haven't met recently. I'm not sure where that's at. I believe it was being led by somebody in the county government. I think we need to continue to come together, find common ground, and start to really brainstorm what long-term sustainable solutions we can identify and start working towards those. Clearly, not doing anything is not a good option because those deer are still doing things. Those goats are still doing things. They are still reproducing. They will continue to push and push the limit. And they're not conscientious about watershed function, right? They're just trying to live. So being very thoughtful, and I believe finding a market-based solution is going to be what's most sustainable, but that's Carolyn's opinion, because it's not, this type of problem is too big. I don't see the government necessarily stepping in and providing a solution. But if we can find a market-based solution, now we've got a feedback mechanism that can hopefully make the economics work. And that's where we need brilliant people like the folks on this call and the people that might be listening to really think about it and really start to look for creative ways that we can all work together. We've got hunters coming to the table. We've got watershed groups coming to the table. We've got plenty of ranchers that are hurting from this problem. So solution is out there. It's out there, but it's going to take a lot of cooperation, a lot of give and take. And I'm glad that Maui County has formed its own Department of Agriculture. And I'm very hopeful that they get a good leader. I don't know where it's at, but I hope that they get a good leader and they can really work to facilitate these types of conversations. I see a hand raised, Mr. Gary. Hi.
Hi there. Question in terms of the managed grazing, is it the lack of a predator prey relationship that is the problem? And is that something that we can somehow synthesize? If so?
Yes, that's a big part of the problem. In the mainland, other places where there are native grazers, there's also native predators that usually keep those populations in check. Here in Hawaii, our environments evolved without any native ruminants for sure. We had other ground dwelling birds that maybe were somewhat took in some vegetation, but we didn't have ruminants. We didn't have cows or goats or donkeys or anything like that, rabbits, nothing. So we don't have predators. And from an agricultural standpoint, that's a good thing. We don't have some of the issues that some of our ranchers in the West have. But for these animals that have been released here and are now naturalized and abundant, it does create a bit of a problem because the only predator is the two-legged one. And, there's a lot of limitations on hunting. You can't just go shoot an animal anywhere. We've got a lot of people that are also out there. So it's a complex problem. And yes, not having a predator is a part of it. I don't know that predator release is anything that anyone would ever go for. Although I hear there's a cougar somewhere on the Big Island. I don't know if you all saw that in the news.
Do you think, I mean, one of the things that we've been, excuse me, dog. One of the things that we've been thinking about is, do you think it would be possible to call on our Paniolo culture and incorporate modern satellite technology that does real-time imaging of soil health and can map out soils and really create a situation where we create jobs using young people with GPS technology to do very intensive managed grazing of multiple species and rotational grazing patterns over large swaths with people on horseback mimicking that predator-prey relationship?
Wow, that was a really big idea. There are places where people have taken, I'm thinking of New Zealand right now. They have managed grazing of deer that are seen as a meat commodity, an agricultural commodity. It's a different deer than access deer. Whether or not we can herd the access deer and manage them in a way that can mimic the types of movements that you're describing. That's basically what intensive grazing management seeks to do with cattle and stuff. The difficulty is, I think access deer don't take to that very easily. It would take a lot of time and committed effort, perhaps, to see if that could work. But that is an idea worth exploring. I just want to clarify a couple things. I wish we had technology that from a satellite we could know soil health. It doesn't quite work totally that way, but we can draw some conclusions from satellite images regarding soil health, mostly regarding cover. And there's more and more technology being developed all the time to try to make those connections and try to learn how to interpret that imagery. I'm really interested in that kind of stuff. And, you know, I'm so glad for what you said, because we do have such a resource in our Paniolo. There are people that know these landscapes better than anyone sits behind a desk, better than I sure ever will. And they are a huge resource and a huge ally in this. And they do have the skill sets and the knowledge to really help bring a lot of valuable mana'o to the table as we try to explore what solutions could look like. And so thank you for recognizing that. And I think, you know, we just all have to bring it together and bring what we have to offer. Thank you, Gary, for your question and comment.
Two more questions on here, one from an iPhone. I'm not sure, it just says favorite forage with a question mark. So I'm guessing, what is your favorite forage, or the animals, cows? I don't know. I know that they all differ.
Yeah, favorite forage. That's a tough one. It totally depends on location and type of animal that you're trying to raise. And there's great things and not so great things about just about all of our grasses. So I'm a grazing specialist. I love them all. I see the other question. How does proper management of pasture grasses help squeeze out unfavorable or invasive species that aren't palatable to common livestock? Great question. Well, how it works is by managing for a healthy, vigorous pasture that's comprised of the plants that you do want. Basically, it doesn't allow the opportunity for invasive plants to get in and get established most of the time. That works well for opportunistic plants that need like a gap in the plant community. Fireweed is a perfect example. You have really well managed pastures, fireweed really won't be too much of a problem for you. We do have a few invasive species that are able to invade a landscape even with good grazing management. So there are a few exceptions to that concept, but for the most part, proper grazing management is basically a managed disturbance. When you can really manipulate your stock density so that you don't have selective grazing. That's another principle at play here. When you can manipulate your stock density so that you don't have selective grazing, you kind of put more grazing pressure, more of a even distribution of that disturbance on all the plants in the community. And sometimes those less desirable plants, they're just not as well adapted. And then you manage for the good species that you do want, the good forages that you do want, and you can manipulate or influence your plant community that way. Great question. Thank you. Any others? You're welcome. Oh, I'll check that out, Gary. Thank you. Gary shared a link to a software that does real-time satellite soil analysis. I'll definitely be interested in checking that out. Thank you. Oh, cool, Kapua. I'm glad you came. Thank you for joining us and for having an open mind. You know, I relish the opportunity to share about how our agricultural lands are also really important to our watershed function. I think a lot of the time, and as a result of, you know, a lot of focus over the last several decades on the forest as our watershed, that we've kind of lost sight that our agricultural lands are also super, super important contributors to our watersheds. And we have so much land area that is in a grass-dominated range type of plant community, that we really need to have a greater appreciation for that and a greater understanding for that the watershed management of these working lands is equally, if not more important. It's also important as the management of our forested watersheds. Don't get me wrong, our forested watersheds are super, super important, and I'm not downplaying that at all, but we cannot overlook the role that even our working lands have in watershed function and in the sustainability of our, especially our aquifers. Our you know, that's too much acreage to not be considering and making sure that we're managing well, so they can contribute in the ways that they do to the health of our Aina. So thank you. Cool. Well, any other questions from anywhere?
Not seeing any pop up. Some comments, just thanking you very much. Great talk, learned a lot. I'd just like to say thank you for being available and being with us. And I'd like everybody to see, or hopefully they see now, like for me, it's important to have people from Hawaii that hold these positions. Is you know, very important, and positions within our government, as well as just being able to network within a community. I always really appreciate that about you and establishing that. And I think that's, for me, the biggest value of having this speaking series available now, is to see that we have capable, not only capable, but very much resourceful people within our networks and within our communities like you, that can help us all get to a better space and place where we manage our soils and our diversity and food security for Hawaii. And
Yeah,
just to thank you for that.
Oh, my pleasure. Yes. Yes, we have lots of really great people, like you said, in the network here. So much talent, so much understanding, and yeah, as much as we can just bring the ideas together and work together. There's a lot we can accomplish. So, hey, I wanted to put a quick plug in for anyone that might be interested. The Society for Range Management. It's a nationwide society. We have a California Pacific section, and Hawaii is hosting the CalPAC section of SRM fall meeting here on the Big Island. It's in October. It's October 6th and 7th. And if you Google CalPAC SRM fall meeting, you should find a link. I can also share the link maybe to Janine, and maybe we can get it somewhere on the website or something. But the meeting's coming up. It's 2 days. Thursday is all presentations, and Friday is going to be field trips. And I just was talking to the coordinator today, and the agenda is really turning out to be amazing. Whoever asked the silvopasture question, we're going to have a talk there about silvopasture and grazing. We're going to have talks about, hang on, where's my notes here? I'm going to be talking a little bit about fire, and particularly kikuyu grass fires. We're going to have a representative from, I think she's with the either USGS or the Park Service, talking about grass fire cycles. We're going to have someone from, I think he's also Forest Service, talking about the Hawaii Drought Knowledge Exchange program. We're going to have Mark Thorne talking about the two-line spittle bug. We have folks that are coming to talk about some of the ungulate issues that we have on rangelands in Hawaii. So really turning out to be a fantastic agenda. Anyone that's got any interest in some of these issues relating to fire, invasive species, silvopasture, and drought for grazing lands in Hawaii should really consider attending. I think registration is like around $150. It's just to cover facility and food. It's just a one-night overnighter if you stay for the workshop. Anyway, it's going to be great. I just encourage anyone that might be interested to go ahead and get registered. I'm not sure if they're going to put a cap on registrations, but you want to, if you think you can do it, go ahead and get registered and come join us. It's going to be another great opportunity to network, great opportunity to learn more about some of these rangeland concepts, and even get out in the field with several of us. So we're also going to have a bunch of range professionals coming down from California. And, sometimes people can bring ideas and perspectives from other places. and maybe sometimes solutions that they found that work there for them, that have similar issues, similar to our issues. And so just encourage anyone that might be interested in some of this stuff to consider joining us for the fall meeting here on the Big Island, October 6th and 7th. And I'll get the details to Janine so she can put it in the newsletter. Great idea. Well, thank you everyone for coming.
All right, that's a whole hour, and I think Janine said in the comments that she'll be putting it in our newsletter. So once you get that information to her, they can go out, get it across the state. That'll be cool.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone. Thanks for the great questions.
Thank you so much, Caroline.
You're welcome.
All right, you guys. Aloha. Have a good night.
Good night. Good night, Auntie.
Hey, handsome.